So let's go ahead and get started.
David, can I say one more thing? I don't know, all of a sudden I see all these familiar faces. I mean, we used to see each other like 2-3 times a year, like, right? Like Bob, Anna, Daniel, I mean, you know, like Ernesto. And now it's been so long since we met face to face. I mean, this is kind of, it's not good. I hope hopefully soon enough we will be able again to come at least to the conferences and maybe to those hackathons and whatever else we plan. I mean, like, I don't know, like Ernesto, I mean, we used to see each other every 2-3 months, and now all of a sudden it's been like a year and a half. It's not good. So. Well,
at least we have this. Zoom has become a verb. So hopefully this is a kind of a stopgap, but also not only that, an evolving hybrid method with which people can meet in between the big conferences and the regional conferences where most of us see each other. This would be a good way to follow up and to maintain accountability, other things within the research interests. I certainly need it. I don't know if everybody else does, but it's nice to be held to the fire, so to speak, on any projects that I'm involved in. And hopefully that's what one of the benefits other people will get out of this also.
And we'll talk later today about the upcoming X-Culture Research Hackathon that we plan to do in this virtual format later this year. So hopefully that will be a good enough substitute for the usual face-to-face things that we do.
Okay, so unless you have something else, Vaz, let's go ahead and get started. I'd like to turn it over to the presenter or the discussant moderator, so to speak. Stefan Gershewski is going to lead a discussion on an idea and a formative idea that he and Vaz have, and they want feedback from everybody. I think this is a more interactive way to, or at least in some of these meetings, to start with papers like this that have ideas that maybe other people can contribute to, is more interactive than just presenting a paper that's already been submitted or maybe even under revise and resubmit. I think at some point in the future we will have a section where we can highlight some papers that have been recently published to show the advancement of X-Culture research. But anybody in the future that really has a formative idea that's using X-Culture data, you know, let's get you on the list to discuss that paper in these discussions and potentially find other contributors if that's wanted. If not, just to get feedback from a lot of professors that have tremendous experience with X-Culture. So Stefan, I'm turning the table over to you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, David, for the kind invitation and introduction. I've prepared a few slides, but I think I just want to give the context for the study. And then I'm happy to get any questions and we can discuss together. So let me just share my screen with you. Go. Can you see on my screen? Is that all good?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, very good. So yeah, thank you all for joining in today. So as David has said already, this is really a very early stage project in progress, so to say. And originally the idea came from the last X-Culture Hackathon. I think it was in 2019 at the just before the AIB in Copenhagen. So we had the hackathon in Odense, and the title of the project is it's a fancy title, but I'm open to suggestions for that as well. Why do you always complain? Antecedents of student complaints in global virtual teams. So let me just get started. I have prepared a few slides, but not that much because, as I said, it's very early stage, and it should take about 10 minutes or so. So I thought, because I think there's quite a few people also in the audience who don't know me yet. I see some familiar faces, but there's still quite a few who don't know me yet. So just a quick overview about myself. Originally from Germany, you could probably guess already from my German accent. I did my my bachelor degree in international business in Germany, Furtwangen University. I then moved to New Zealand. I did my master's and PhD in IB at Victoria University of Wellington in New Zealand. So overall, I stayed there for about 7 years. Then my first sort of full-time job in academia was in Seoul at Hanguk University of Foreign Studies, where I worked as an assistant professor of international business for 3 years before they moved on to Hannam University, which is about 2 hours south of Seoul. And then in 2017, I made the big move from South Korea to the UK, where I'm still currently at. I first worked as an assistant professor in international business and strategy at Henley Business School at University of Reading. Worked there for 2.5 years before I then moved to the University of Kent, where I'm currently at, as an associate professor in international marketing. So that's now for about 1.5 years or so. Now, I know we are all living in COVID times, but I thought I would give you some encouragement because I enjoy working from home. And I especially like working in my garden home office here. So I thought I'd like to share that with you. So spring is actually from last year, the first lockdown in the UK. But I look forward now, the weather's coming, spring is coming. So I look forward to doing another year in my garden home office soon. Okay, so let me move on to the topic of the project. So I gave you a bit of the context, but why this topic? So I've participated in X-Culture for quite a few years now. I think the first was in 2013 with my students at Hanguk University of Foreign Studies. And then I did it at Hannam University, and after I moved to the UK, I was teaching IB international business modules and courses at undergraduate and also MBA level. And I still also did participate in X-Culture in 2 universities, Henley Business School and Kent Business School. Now, what I found, so this is purely based on observations in those different universities in 2 different countries. I felt there was quite a big difference in terms of the number of student complaints. And I've had some meetings and some discussions with VAS about that. And we did some sort of brainstorming a few weeks ago where we discussed some potential topics. But what I've found, and based on my own, I mean, that's obviously it's subjective, but I felt there were some differences in South Korea versus UK in terms of the X-Culture student complaints. So what I found is, first of all, the number of student complaints was very different. In South Korea, where I was doing X-Culture for 4 years, I didn't get any sort of official complaints from the students, not that I'm aware of. But the interesting thing is, after I moved to UK, especially at Henley Business School, I had some really big challenges in terms of student complaints. And these were quite major complaints because I had to report to my dean and head of school, where students were complaining about X-Culture, and they said it's too challenging or too difficult, and I had to justify myself. And that happened, for 2 years when I was teaching at Henley Business School. Every year it happened. I also felt, and I think we can discuss that later, I think the men of student complaints as well. So I think in South Korea, obviously, students found the project probably challenging as well and difficult, and dealing with time differences and so on. But I believe, and again, that's my own anecdotal evidence, or how you want to call it, I think it has to do with probably some cultural differences. They never went to my dean in South Korea, or never went to head of school, and also never went to myself. But I believe among themselves, I'm sure they also complained with each other and complained about me and complained about X-Culture. But it never reached a sort of official complaint where they approached somebody else. Now, what I also felt a difference in terms of South Korea versus UK in terms of X-Culture student complaints. In the UK, especially at Henley Business School, after the complaint was received by the dean or head of school at that time at Henry Business School, I had the feeling that, again, that's my subjective observation, that I wasn't really protected by my dean. So as I said, I had to write a report, I had to say what I did, I had to meet the student, I had to meet my dean, which is very rarely the case in the UK, but they took it very seriously, and I felt almost that the senior leadership and also the administration were much more on the side of the student. And I had also some discussions with my colleagues at Henry Business School and some other colleagues also at Kent Business School, and they told me it has to be a bit with the culture. And in the UK, obviously, it seems that part of the culture is just to complain and to moan about things. And I mean, I found that quite interesting because, as I said, in South Korea for 4 years, I never had that experience with dealing with any student complaints. And certainly not in front of my dean or head of school in South Korea. Right, now, what we have, and I think as a result of the X-Culture Hackathon in Odense 2 years ago, X-Culture in the survey that we always do with the students, there we have now collected some data. I think Vas can probably help me with that, but there's about 2 or 3 years data.
Yeah, I'll give more information on
that.
that.
Yeah, you can update that. So we do have some data, I think, starting from 2019, and then every semester, I believe we have some quantitative data as well as, so these are the peer evaluations, for example, from the post-project survey. So that's after the end of the X-Culture, where each student has to complete that survey. So there's some Likert scale from 1 complained a lot to 5 never complained. We also have some self-reported measures, again, from the post-project survey. So have things ever gone so bad that you had to complain or ask for help from your professor, X-Culture administration? Again, this is, I believe it's a Likert scale. And also what we do have, again, these are self-reported subjective measures, weekly surveys. As you know, each week there's a milestone with X-Culture normally. So questions such as, do you enjoy working with the people on your teams? You none at all, 100 very much. Is everything clear? You know how to do and how to proceed? How motivated are you to continue working on the project? And do you believe your team can develop a high quality report? I mean, these are more indirect measures. They don't really give us very explicit information about complaints, but I think they can be interesting to analyze as well. Then also what we do have, we have open-ended comments, again, from the weekly surveys. And I believe also that there has been already some coding being done, doing the interview or the comments from the surveys. I think that has been done, but again, Vas can probably update on that.
Yeah,
in addition,
I'll give a quick update.
Yeah,
more data.
Thank you, Vas. Yeah, and the last one that we do have is from the coaches, from the X-Culture coaches. So that we do have some data there as well, whether the coaches received any complaints from the students from the coaching program. So we see, you can see we do have a lot of different measures, but mainly I think probably the most important ones are the quantitative measures from the surveys. And as you know, we have a big, every semester there's several thousand students who answer those surveys. So the potential database is getting quite big. And I think we can even do some sort of longitudinal analysis over time if the topic is interesting and if there's no complaints. Anyways, okay, now so what I discussed with Vas a few weeks ago in a quite a productive meeting, we talked about some potential research topics, and I would like to just put them out in the room, mainly about the overall topic and some of the potential research questions. And I think after that, if we have time, I'm happy to discuss and talk about those topics. So the first sort of paper 1 would be about international rankings on complaining. So 2 potential questions here could be, do students from some countries complain more? My hypothesis would be that the more individualistic cultures and countries are probably tend to complain more than the more collectivist cultures.
But also
Power distance as well,
may
yeah.
play a
Not
role.
only collectivism.
And maybe even masculinity, femininity,
Yeah.
you know, sort of achievement orientation versus kind of harmony
Yeah,
orientation.
I think Bas, you are the better expert on culture than I am. Yeah, but Hofstede, of course, the different cultural dimensions. But I do believe there is some cultural element in here, again, based on my own experience. And then also the second follow-up question, then if there are international differences in the complaining rate, what explains them? And there's a wide potential, you know, determinants. Could be also undergrad versus postgraduate, could be age, could be gender. There's a lot of potential predictors that could potentially explain the differences in complaining behavior. Then the second paper that we sort of discussed was about the personal characteristics that predict propensity to complain. So, I mean, in the first paper, there would be more like a sort of ranking. So, for example, you could say that maybe US is a country where people complain more, or UK is very high, probably. I don't want to go into that. I don't want to offend anybody, of course. But there would be sort of a ranking, 1 to 100, or how many countries we have. The second paper then is a bit more sort of, you know, about more analytic. It's about the personal characteristics that could predict propensity to complain. So who are the people who complain more, and also why do some people complain more than others? Again, these are very broad questions, obviously, and we have to focus on that. I'm aware of that, but I thought, you know, make it broad. And then I'm sure you're all experts in your areas and could give some insights and feedback. The third paper, I think that's probably one of my favorite, is the profiles and typologies of complainers. So you make a sort of, who is a typical complainer, different types of moaners and different types of complaints. What are the characteristics, personality profiles of students who complain a lot. So I guess this has a lot to do also with psychology and personality traits. You know, the big five, for example, could come to my mind here: openness, introvert versus extrovert.
But also maybe cultural intelligence.
Emotional intelligence, of course. Yeah, I think that's hugely important.
One thing that comes to mind, maybe also the rank of the university.
Yes, yeah.
Maybe people from top schools are kind of more snobby, or maybe the other way around. Maybe it's, you know.
Yes, that's a good point, Vas. Yeah, I think also that comes in the first point here as well. I guess the university and the ranking of the university or the business school plays a big role. I believe, I mean...
There's a comment here from Karen. She says maybe majors.
Majors, yeah, could be.
Majors.
Maybe. Yeah, maybe.
And we do have that data. We know also masters versus undergraduate, or maybe more experienced, less experienced. I don't know, like, is it the younger people who are more likely to complain? Or
I believe the postgrad, the MBAs and MSCs, they complain more than
they feel entitled or so. But interestingly, we can also differentiate the level of studies versus the age, because we have some older people who just went back to school, and so they perhaps will be a little bit less sort of pretentious or you know, high opinion of themselves, and maybe they will complain less. But those maybe even younger ones who made it to MBA programs, maybe they will think that they, you know, so cool, and they, you know, everybody's beneath their, you know.
Of course. I mean, I think that that's also an important point potentially. And then the fourth paper potentially would be the role of the instructor in promoting or restricting complaining. I think that could be an interesting angle as well. So what is the instructor's role in terms of student complaints? And I believe that some instructors are quite strict, and they make those expectation management. I think it's important. They say it's not a smooth ride. There's ups and downs, and you know, you have to do a learning curve. And other instructors, they say everything will be fine. And you know, then of course students have different expectations, and as a result, they may be disappointed, and they may then complain more than they would normally do if they were aware of the potential challenges and difficulties. So the instructor is, of course, very important, because especially if you do it for the first time, and how much time you commit, how you communicate with the students, I think that plays also a role in terms of the complaints. But of course, I'm I know you all participate, or most of you, and I'm sure you have your own stories and how you deal with any and with your students and when they ask you a lot of questions. Yeah.
I will say though, Stefan, when it comes to instructor or the role of the manager, again, anecdotally, but it seems to that about 80% of all the complaints we receive at the sort of administration level come from literally like 2 or 3 professors or classes.
Oh, is it? Okay.
So it's like some professors, their students complain all the time.
Oh, is it? Okay.
And other professors, they never, like I never hear from them and they always score better than others. So it could be not even nationality because, like, as I said, there are some professors in the United States whose students complain all the time. And there are some professors in the United States from whose students I've never heard any complaint. And so I wonder again if it's how the professor sort of presents the project and manages it, if that makes a difference. I don't know why some are more and others are less, but there must be some sort of a difference.
Yeah, I mean, I just, what came to my mind while you were talking, you know, at some stage we had those pre-project readiness tests also for the instructors. I remember those a few years ago. I'm not sure whether they are still around. I think we have dropped them, but I mean, that could be maybe also explained why some, also in terms of the performance and then of the students. I believe, and again, that's a hypothesis, that those instructors who have high scores on those pre-ex-culture readiness tests, I'm sure the students are also better informed and they perform better on average than those classes where the professor doesn't care as much. I believe. I mean, that's again, I just put that out here in the room. Okay, and then a few other topics that could be potentially interesting. Paper 5, I think that's an interesting point here. That's the culture of entitlement in higher education and its effect on complaining. And as you know, in the US and in the UK also, it seems to be a trend in higher education that the tuition fees go up every year almost and very expensive. And students often, especially at postgraduate level, MBA or master MSc level, they often feel entitled to education and feel sort of a customer rather than a student. And that, of course, brings also their own expectations. And if they have to work hard and they don't get their desired results, then obviously they spend £30,000 on an MBA and they are not happy with ex-culture, then they may probably complain more. So then, say a student in Germany who doesn't pay any tuition fees and doesn't see him or herself as a sort of customer, it's more about a student in Germany. And I think that could be also one of the trends potentially that, I don't know if we have numbers on or we could probably get those figures about tuition fees and the correlation with complaining behavior. Or if you look at some universities, how often they complain versus others. But I feel especially at MBA level, it seems to be universally that it's also at Henley Business School and other universities in the UK. It's really driven by providing a good service rather than educational sort of experience. I feel, again, that's you may contradict my opinion, but that's what in some stage in 1 year I even had to adjust the marks for ex-culture because of the complaints. And I mean, that never happened to me before, but my dean and my head of school was basically saying I have to lift up the marks now because of those complaints to make them happy, basically. Anyways, I think that's an interesting point just generally about the role of higher education. Then paper 6, the antecedents and consequence of complaining in teams. Do teams where students complain a lot perform better or worse? So what's the impact on performance? And I believe actually in those teams where students complain a lot, I believe they perform better than those who don't complain. And actually I have some, again, anecdotal evidence from those teams at Henley Business School who complained a lot. There were a few. They were outstanding and they really got really good reports and very high, one of the best among the whole class. So I believe The consequences, I mean, it's difficult for us as instructors, but for the students and for the teams, it may give them the additional pressure or motivation to perform better. So does complaining help or hurt team performance, and do students who complain perform better? Yeah. So I believe, as I said, I believe there's a correlation here as well. Then paper 7, the choice of communication tools on complaining in teams. I mean, that's the nature of X-Culture is virtual, and one of the hypotheses could be that because you are only communicating via Zoom or Skype or WhatsApp, and you are not meeting face to face, students are more likely to complain because it's much easier and you don't know the person personally, and it's more difficult, and it's a different dynamic, different group dynamic in a virtual team versus a face-to-face team. And I mean, often those if you meet teams face-to-face and you build that rapport with the initial face-to-face kickoff meeting, you can avoid some conflicts more easily, potentially, because you have that personal connection to each other. But those in virtual teams who never see each other, who live thousands of miles away, maybe they can't be bothered, and they may complain more easily about their team members. I mean, again, that's just the way of we live in the social media sort of Twitter sort of generation, and yeah, I mean, anyways.
Yeah, so not have the same sense of sort of camaraderie or friendship.
I mean,
less
that's
obligation.
I mean, I've, as you know, I'm no longer on Facebook or Instagram, but it's not all good, and especially Twitter, it's quite can be quite toxic, and I feel. Yeah.
But there's the thing. So if you were on Instagram, I would see your pictures, your family, your travel. So I kind of feel more connection. Maybe in that case. And in that case, maybe I would feel less comfortable. Complaining about you. But if you don't know who you are, and two words on the screen.
Yeah, if you only rely on email, for example, and you are not using any social media, then it's just an email address, and you don't know that person. And if you don't communicate much as well, I think probably also the frequency of communication and how you communicate. And I also remember those teams who make the effort to make a video conferencing on Zoom or on Skype, in real time. Often they perform better than those who can't be bothered, who only rely on email. And so I think how you communicate and the choice of communication tools plays also a role in terms of complaining behavior. And then finally, paper 8. I mean, there's a lot. I know it sounds very ambitious, but I mean, I think it's a very interesting topic. Just the role of COVID-19 and complaining. What does complaining behavior change, or has it changed over the past years since COVID-19 hit the world? Has it maybe even become less? Could be also potentially an outcome that people are now more aware of, the difficulties. And I understand there has been an increase in applications with X-Culture, isn't it? So global virtual teams.
But also, Stefan, so we just submitted a paper where we looked at satisfaction and conflicts before and during COVID. And we thought COVID will make things worse, but actually make things better. So now satisfaction is up and there are fewer conflicts. So it almost seems like people either sort of mobilize and complain less just because everything's difficult, or maybe they just stuck at home and they're happy to see anyone.
Even on Zoom now, I'm happy to see faces, and I mean, it's just, I think people probably become also a bit more humble and think more about themselves, about other people, and maybe they could also explain why they are just happy to, I don't know, and be grateful that they can still study and participate in X-Culture. I mean, it's
Stefan.
Bob just noted, he says maybe because of COVID, people finally learned how to use Zoom and everything, and so they're more.
Of course.
It's true. I mean, a year ago, we literally had to explain to people how Skype works, how, they knew email, obviously, but, Zoom, like nobody knew about it. And now all of a sudden, everybody knows it. So it's much easier. So maybe just more comfortable from that perspective. Maybe it's much more.
I think that's a great idea for a paper. Technology moderated interaction with complaining on Teams is a really interesting topic, like Zoom. the relationship building, and that has managerial implications in a number of aspects that for sales, let's say, other areas in managerial that go beyond just X culture and pedagogical things. And that's a hot topic. So
it is, of course, yeah.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Bob's comment, I think there is an easy way to test it. So Bob, we have semester after semester. And so if satisfaction jumped last spring, then we know that it was not communication proficiency, because at that time, nobody still knew Zoom, but already had the crisis on their hands. But if the satisfaction improves by now, so when everybody's, proficient in all these Zoom and other tools, then it could be they just simply become more comfortable with the technology. So I think we can literally experimentally test that. Stefan, we have a bunch of questions, and maybe
I'm just one more minute. One more slide. And so some of the potential target journals, I hear some potential ideas: CHIPS, Journal of International Business Studies, Academy of Management Learning and Education, AMLE, maybe some of the more personality papers, Journal of Applied Psychology, Journal of International Management, or Journal of World Business. So there are very different sorts of journals, but I think that also sort of highlights the diversity of the different topics. And
maybe even Journal of Business Ethics, because
Journal of Business Ethics, of course, that's a good point as well. So my final slide for today, and this is actually a call for co-authors. So for anybody who is interesting and who does not like to complain, but who likes to study about complaining, if you're interested, so at the moment, as I said, this is the two of us, Vas and myself, and we are looking for especially two co-authors in two areas. One is related to theory. So if you have a background in any of those topics that I mentioned, and you are good in theory or literature review, we would like to invite one co-author. And also one co-author for data analysis. And as you could see, these are mainly, these are survey data, quantitative data, and that will be, we do have some qualitative data as well, but our main focus will be predominantly quantitative data. So if you are interested, please email me. Here's my email address. I'm happy to share that in the chat as well. By 31st of March, I'll give you a deadline. And also to make it easy, because I don't know all of you, if you could include one paragraph in your email, how you could make a contribution to the topic. So if it's theory or if it's data analysis, and also which paper topics you would be specifically interested in out of those 8. So the plan is now that we will start officially on the 1st of April. So it's in about a month or so, and then we will have a Zoom meeting, and then we can kick off things from there. So thank you all for your participation and for your attention, and I look forward to your questions or comments. Thank you.
So maybe let me read some questions here, and before we do, just a quick update on the data. So we've been tracking to whom the students complain, so we know if they complain to professors, if they complain to administration, so basically to me and my team, if they complain to coaches, so there is also a system that keeps track of that, if they complain to team members, and then when it comes to team members, both if they complain about the project itself, but also if they complain about professors or admins. There was a very good comment, I think it was from Angelica about, and Karen, about the type of complaints. And we do track that as well. So in some cases, it's not so much a complaint, but more kind of asking for help. And so that's a important difference. And so we track it so we know if the sort of request or complaint is about free riders on the team, if somebody is not participating, is it about some sort of a conflict in the team? Is it about clarity of instruction? I'm not sure what to do. Is it more about I'm not happy, enjoyment, satisfaction? If it's complaint about support, or if it's actually a request for a help. So if it's informing us or asking for something in exchange. So that's another one. And one more thing, so we do have sort of, if people complain about team members, we know who complains about whom. And so if you wanted to do some sort of network analysis, like maybe, you know, people from the same nationality don't complain about it, or, you know, of the same nationality don't complain about each other. But also there was a very interesting comment from Tiet. He said that maybe people from like Nordic countries complain about people from other countries thinking that they are sort of better, maybe like some sort of chauvinism or so to speak. And we do have those data as well. So we may see them, maybe, you know, maybe Americans complain only about Chinese, but never about Canadians, or maybe the other way around. So we can look at that if needed. So we have those data.
Yeah, Vaz, I think Daniel had a question or had raised his hand.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, and so I'm not keeping up with all the questions. So Dave, maybe.
Oh, I haven't seen the chats, so I haven't seen those questions.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Daniel?
if I may add to this issue about Nordic country students, I would like to refine it. It's not only about chauvinism, because you see, they have studied this, some of them have studied these cultural theories, and they are speaking about high context, low context cultures, and often you say, okay, these people are from Brazil, these are from manana culture, and that's the reason why they don't meet deadlines. So I raise this question even in more intriguing way. Is it sometimes that if people study cultural differences based on Gerstovstedt and others, it can justify such a prejudice, saying that, okay, why you ask us to cooperate with the students who don't know so well a timeline as Germans do?
Yeah.
They very seldom complain that Germans don't follow deadlines.
Yeah, we have a couple of Germans here, so maybe they have a comment.
Yeah. And in my class, when I have had not the X culture, but the other type of projects, also Germans complain that French don't follow deadlines. But how to deal with this issue? Even I would say sometimes pre-knowledge of cultural differences justifies for them, makes more legitimate to make such complaints.
Mm-hmm.
I believe Daniel had a question.
Yeah, thank you, David, since you mentioned my name. First of all, I want to echo Vaz's notion about meeting face-to-face again. So let me start complaining about COVID-19. And
so much about Germans not complaining.
I hope that complaint will be heard somewhere. So
that complaint is accepted. Yes.
Yeah, we hopefully get a semblance of normality again. So to meet face-to-face, I missed that too, Vaz, but it's good to see you and you know, everyone else, good colleagues. David, thank you so much for getting this group rolling. It's really nice, you know, to learn about you know, topics and ideas you wouldn't think about in your own field. You know, I think this is what that academic interaction is all about, to kind of broaden your own research field, because oftentimes we get stuck in our own area. Okay. I have a couple of things, you know, and Stefan, from one German to another, okay, I know we complain a lot in Germany. Well, when I say we, I've been living in the United States for almost 20 years, so I've been out of Germany, but I know there's a lot of complaints. So what I would think, first of all, this is the important concept, right? Complaining. And I haven't read the chat, but I chatted down some notes as well about we should really try to understand what that term complaint really means, right? You know, different types of complaints. I think Vaz mentioned this based on all the chat comments. So whether it's just, you know, very administrative level complaint, or a complaint about whatever the readiness test, that some questions are obsolete, or if it's really project related, or is it team related, but maybe also the intensity of that complaint that we could think about. Is it a really trivial complaint which should have never been brought up, or is it a complaint which makes kind of, you know, has some merit but could have been resolved without that complaint in the first place, or whether it's really a solid complaint. So I think a rating kind of scale of different types of complaints and intensities of complaints and the type of merit, you know, would help us, I think, to understand, rather than group everything as a complaint. The other thing I was thinking about is whether complaints are always bad. Okay, I think there's always that notion that complaining is a bad thing, and I think we're in academia. Complaining might actually be good, okay, and might be helping professors to improve their pedagogy. It might help us. Vaz knows this. You know, when we had the chance to meet face-to-face, we always discussed at least twice a year, based on student data, what we can improve, and that's mostly based on complaints, right? So I think, you know, that the notion of complaints being something bad necessarily might be questions in that paper as well, and look at the positive effects of complaints, in addition to just looking at antecedents. One of the other things that I thought about is that I entirely agree. I think that national culture clearly has an effect here, that certain cultures are more likely to complain than others. And what I'm thinking about, and I know Vas does a lot of work on that field too, and Gerd Hofstede, you know, may he rest in peace, you know, he talked about this too, that not everything is at the national level. Okay, so there are so many sub-levels which may explain things much better than the national level, and to not commit an ecological fallacy to basically try to explain lower level phenomena based on just national level kind of data. And I've been thinking about, Stefan, what I didn't see in your research question, that might be something you may want to consider, is to look at the university level. And, you know, universities may be different, the culture at universities. So that some universities, you know, like you said, you know, administrative people protect students much more than they would protect faculty. So every complaint, you know, would basically be accepted without really testing the face value of it. Whereas other universities, they are completely behind faculty. They brush off student complaints in most cases, unless it's really, you know, they show up with a lawyer and threaten to basically, you know, public relations if no one hears their complaint. And that may not be explained fully by national culture. That might be explained by the type of university and university culture. And national culture, I believe, may play a role. You know, the status of a professor, for example. I know that the status role of professors is higher in some cultures and lower in others. I mean, when I go out to Australia, I teach there every year. You know, the Australian, they call you Mike. You know, hey Mike, have a good day. They mention your first name, and all the Asian students, they bow down and call you Professor Doctor. So national culture does have an effect, but I believe that university culture has a big role as well. And I've recently worked with a very interesting colleague who got a doctorate, but, you know, made his money in the you know, in consulting, and he wrote a book about cultures of silence versus cultures of voice within organizations. So whether some organizations have a culture of voice, meaning they actually encourage complaints in the good spirit of continuous improvement, whereas other companies, they have a culture of silence where they basically kind of frown upon people speaking up, you know, that kind of idea. And maybe we could apply that concept of culture of voice versus culture of silence to universities and look more at the university level of analysis. And then I know, Vas, I think the last paper we did together was an Academy of Management, Learning and Education. That might be a good outlet, the AMLE, to look at prescriptive things, okay? Because educators read that journal and say, not only do we describe what are the antecedents to have a descriptive paper, but we are more prescriptive and say, what can universities do from a cultural perspective to create a culture of voice, to see complaints as something positive, but at the same time, of course, take the negative part of complaints too, right? If we can avoid certain complaints through whatever technology or cultural change. So I think, you know, this is a very interesting topic area, Stefan. I think you can build a research program around this for the next 10 years. And hopefully, you know, have a lot of sunshine in your home office to write up all those papers. So I'm more a macro level kind of person. Vas knows this, you know, usually looking at the country level or firm level of analysis. But if there's anything I can help with, you know, in any of those papers, I'd be very happy to at least contribute ideas or contribute if there's any way or form I can. So great ideas. So let me stop. Otherwise, you start complaining that I talk too much. So.
Stefan, based on what Daniel was saying, my feedback would be on this is that papers 2, 3, and 4 could conceivably be moderators of paper 1. And depending on where you want to take this paper to the level of journal, the higher level the journal, in my opinion, the more reviewers are going to probably attack potential moderators to the results based on cultural factors and structure, instructors, et cetera, et cetera. There's any number of moderators that could come in to dictate the propensity to complain. So from a methodological standpoint, I think it's important to identify the target journal, because the higher up you go, the more they're going to probably attack the potential moderators on any of these things, because it's a great topic. As you identified, there's 7 or 8 or 10 papers that could be done here.
Exactly.
And cultural moderation is certainly one. So my last input would be potentially a comparative study where you have a control group, where you control some of these moderators compared to where those moderators are not controlled. And you do a comparative study of the control group versus the uncontrolled group in terms of propensity to complain. That could be really interesting, at least from my thoughts. That's it.
Yeah, we have some very good discussion going on in the comments. I'm not sure if we'll have time to sort of talk about each point, but I'll definitely save all those comments. So thank you so much. Yeah.
So I would suggest that if anyone would like to comment via Zoom right now, do what Daniel did. Use the little raise hand button, and we will recognize you in order and go through each of the comments and suggestions that way. That'll, because we have a large group, much larger than we expected.
Yeah.
45 people, but we don't want to dominate the discussion or keep anybody out who wants to contribute. So just hit the little raise hand on Zoom and we'll address each one as we see it. So I see Marija has just raised her hand. So
David, if I may, 1 second. So there have been a couple of comments sort of related to the discussion. Want to just very briefly address them. Sharon says maybe if we can consider if the students prefer to work in groups or not. And we do measure a preference to work in team or alone, as well as preference for a type of team, and if they want to participate in X-Culture to begin with, because some students have to do it, but they don't want to do it. So that's a very interesting one. And then also a very good comment from Angelica about the actual problems. Maybe some complaining is justified and some is not. And again, we do have measures of the objective situation in the team. And so we can control for that. So maybe some complaining is, you know, perfectly just and others maybe not.
I think Marija, would you like to go?
Okay, I just can share a bit of my experience because I have been a student for X-Culture as well, and there was a situation that in that time in my team we was running quite okay. There was challenges, but I was fine with that. I was prepared, but probably it was because I was one of the oldest in my class, in my Latvian, in my university class. I was one of the oldest one, and there was one another, but others was complaining a lot. I don't know if they was complaining to administration, but they was complaining to the professor that the team doesn't collaborate, that it is difficult and so on. But one of the interesting moments that we realized in some other studies in our class, that I was the only person who are a middle one in a family. That I have an eldest brother and youngest sister, and all others was only ones, the oldest, or but most of them was the only ones actually. And there was I was a unique person who was in a family in between somebody. And it was, I don't know how it could relate, but one of the professors told that probably you take more responsibility sometime in some cases because you have this adjustment from your childhood. But that's just an idea, maybe where you can also somehow gather data. How much family members they have, these participants specific. But so, and I can share some other stories from different perspectives of this complaining, but it's just, I can offer my help if necessary.
I think one thing we need to be cognizant of on a paper like this is that we all have a lot of anecdotal examples of complaining. The challenge on a paper like this is going to be to distill the anecdotal to the academically researchable. I'm not sure I'm saying that right. Does that make sense?
If you've been trying to collect data, you're absolutely right. There is one thing when, you know, a professor says students from this country complain and these they don't. But so we've been trying to collect more or less objective data. And so obviously that's something that is hard to capture, but we should have something good enough.
Okay, well, T, you have your hand up?
Yes, I wanted to add, for me, this issue of complaining, it's not so much such a pedagogical problem to be solved. It's more how to prepare students through this process for being successful in future online teamwork. So I see here 3 dimensions. Now, one is what I mentioned is cultural differences, how to positively overcome these different, let's say, timetable related and deadline related differences. The other dimension is still for me, if I think about working students who have families, who work, and they also do X-culture. For them, a key question is the right balance between synchronous communication, as we have just now, and asynchronous communication. Indeed, to get such an emotional touch, it's good to have synchronous communication, but at the same to structure information and to go through text and to work in project mode, there should be a balance, and that would be an interesting issue to study. And maybe the third, how we could differentiate relational conflicts and task-related conflicts. Because task-related conflicts, if they lead to complaints, it's actually very valuable outcome if people see that they have certain different type of information, different type of values, different type of knowledge base. That is we actually learn in X-culture. So indeed, it would be maybe not stupid to complain if different students have different experience, but then such complaints should be turned to such a positive value in the process.
I have a question. Does anybody here have suggestions for Stefan regarding specific literature or theories that would be helpful as it relates to complaining in global virtual teams, team settings, or any other related literature out there? Because I think the theory side, if they choose to go after JIBS or any really high level journal with this, the theory is going to be important, and grounding it in existing theory will be a key thing here. So this is a great place if somebody has knowledge about that to suggest it.
There are actually a few suggestions in the comments already, so so hopefully something that we can use.
David, does anybody else have? We're actually we've gone on almost an hour.
Yes, so we still have a couple topics to cover. So I wonder if we can. So.
Yeah, I think we can proceed. If we, Stefan, we have some good comments in the chat room, and
yeah. Just want to say thank you to everybody. Sorry, David. Just want to say thank you to everybody for your nice comments. It's really no complaints here from my side. It's very useful to get your perspectives, and yeah, I think it is an interesting topic, and I know. I mean, I think David, you mentioned the first paper, and using the other 3 papers as a moderator. I mean, the first paper is more like a very practitioner focused, like Harvard Business Review type of paper. It's not a JIBS paper, of course. It's more, even it could be a bit controversial, but I like controversial papers. So, and it creates discussion and debate, so sort of a commentary or research note almost. There's the others, of course, they are a bit more academically focused with a theory and so on. So, but I agree with you, we have to look at the journal and the topic and the theory. It's important. Yeah, but yeah, thank you also, Daniel. I liked your comments too, very interesting. I do believe also the university culture plays a role, and especially in the UK, they are quite I don't know, I don't want to go in too much detail now, but there is some differences in terms of university culture and how students are treated versus staff, and open versus closed cultures and so on. So I think there's some good, interesting stuff in there in terms of corporate culture. Okay, I leave it here. Thank you all.
Yeah, well, thank you, Stefan. I think the second topic of the agenda was to talk about new research projects and ones that are actually out there that have been started but are really just languishing. Vaz, would you like to take that over?
Yeah. So we have one sort of persistent problem, so to speak. So we have sometimes stumble upon very good, promising ideas. And sometimes people even sign up to lead those research projects, but then years pass and nothing happens. And so I wanted to share a few studies that are particularly interesting, but have not been progressing over the last few years. And so we're basically looking maybe for new either leaders for the team or maybe some additions to the team who can perhaps help us, kind of reawaken those studies and put them in good, to good use. But first, so if you go to the Biculturalism website, if you click on for researchers and click on research projects, you will see here the full list of ongoing studies. And so you can click on those and see, what's going on there, but also you will, oops, I'm not sure why this one didn't open, so I'm not sure something, yeah. But anyway, you will be able to see there who's responsible for the study, the status of the study, and things like that. And so if I may, I'll just very briefly give you ideas of some studies that sort of, didn't go anywhere, but seem to be good enough for good publications. Maybe some of you will want to, help us promote them. So one qualitative research stream, it's not even a study. We have tons, literally hundreds of thousands of pages of qualitative data. So comments that the students leave every week at the end of the project. And so we've been trying to do something with it. And we even published a couple of papers, but there is so much more going on there. And so several people signed up to sort of lead this qualitative research stream, and somehow it never goes far. And so if any of you are interested in qualitative research, as I said, we have tons of data. Much of that has been even, properly packaged and coded. And so we need for someone who maybe, will take it to, from what we have to a publication in the journal. Second, we have a lot of interesting ideas related to gender roles, men versus women. And again, we've done some papers on men versus women, but still not enough. And so nobody really looked at, for example, do men perform better than women? Are men more likely to be leaders of the team or women are? Are there differences in, for example, complaining about men versus women or by men versus women? So lots of interesting potential studies here. And so we have some description here. So for some interesting, So again, it seems to me like it's a hot topic. And somehow we never really looked closely at gender differences in global virtual teams. Then we started and even did the analysis and even presented a couple of papers. I'm actually involved with this one, and there are a couple of other colleagues, but somehow never really published anything. So, and that's biculturalism. So we know if students come from multicultural families, or if students grew up in multiple countries, or if students identify with multiple cultures otherwise. And so there is this whole body of literature that says that people who have multicultural identities, like, for example, like a Ukrainian, American, Canadian, or something like that. So those people may be more effective in cross-cultural teams. And somehow, as I said, we even did the analysis, even have good results, but it's been years and nothing really, like we haven't really done much. And so again, maybe somebody can take another look and maybe help us sort of revitalize those studies and get them published somewhere. This one also is very embarrassing. So proactive personality. This study has been bouncing from one lead author to another. We presented, I think, even 2 different versions of this study at conferences. I think we even got some sort of like a best paper award for it years ago. And somehow it just never goes anywhere. And so there was one person who took over, then another person, and now it's been like 2-3 years that we haven't done anything with it. So we have several years of this proactive personality data. We know people who have proactive personalities perform better. And we even have some sort of a draft of a paper, and it just didn't go anywhere. So maybe somebody can again help us. So some of these people actually moved now to industry, so they're no longer professors, and maybe that's why it's not going anywhere, but somehow just kind of sitting there. Communication tools. So we track communication, how many messages, how many minutes, what channels, what tools, who communicates with whom. So endless opportunities for research. And again, multiple people thought about that, multiple people tried to do something about it, and somehow it just didn't go anywhere. So again, seems like a very promising line of research, and yet somehow it didn't really go anywhere. So you can look at the study here, maybe some of you are interested. again, predictors of perceived differences and distances. So we ask at the beginning of the project how much people think that team members in their team are different from them, or how easy or difficult they think it would be to work with those people from different countries. And then we ask at the end of the project, same question. And so we know that from before to after, people see their team members as less different, and they believe that it would be not as difficult to work with them as they thought before. But again, for some people, the difference is huge. For others, it's small. Some people improve from before to after, others go down on those ratings. And so again, there are all kinds of possible explanations for this, as well as consequences. I mean, when I see you as more different, will I perform better or worse? And again, very promising line of research. We have literally, we've been collecting these data for a decade now. So we have like 70,000 cases. And somehow we really, haven't really done much with that. So in fact, it says here dormant and it needs a fresh start. So I was kind of responsible for that, but I guess it's my fault that it didn't go anywhere, but maybe if some of you can join and help here. So we have a lot of data. Cross-cultural differences in peer evaluation. So Daniel, I guess it's kind of directed to you. So we started working on this study a long time ago, and I think it's not only Daniel, we have a bunch of other people. I don't have the list here, but this one is extremely promising. We identified multiple peer evaluation styles, so to speak, like, self-promotion versus modesty. Some people give themselves higher peer evaluations and others are modest. We look at generosity. Some people are more generous when they give it, high evaluations to others. We look at, differentiation. Some people give everyone the same peer evaluations and some give some high, some low. And so again, I believe this is one of the most promising studies, and we had so many meetings about it years ago. We wrote a lot and somehow we didn't really finish it. So I'm not sure if it's time. Oh, I think, yeah, Dirk was the lead author here. So another German connection. But I remember Daniel Roddick was somehow involved. I was on that study and somehow it didn't really go anywhere. So time to maybe take another look. Cross-cultural differences in self-promotion. Well, this one's claimed now. So this one's claimed. So this one's already. So anyway, I want to stop here. It seems like I had an Amazon delivery because my dog is telling me about that. Sorry about that. But if any of you are interested in those studies, please do let me know and maybe we can show you what's been done and get it published finally.
Okay, like Baz said, if anybody's interested in that, Baz, I think you would be a better coordinator to.
Yes, contact me if you're interested, and then I'll send you what's done. I'll connect you with the people who originally were responsible for the study. We can then check with them if they're still interested. But somewhere in the X-Culture sort of collaboration principles, we have this provision that if the study stays dormant for too long, and if it's a good idea, even if somebody at some point said, I'll do it, if they didn't do it, we kind of have the right to reclaim it, and maybe, because we don't want the study to die just because somebody is no longer interested or maybe retired or maybe just too busy with other things.
In fact, the first X-Culture paper I had worked on out of Odense was like that. We picked up on some measurements that other people had used that was just lying dormant for years. So I encourage anybody to look at that. The data is available already. The variables have been collected. So there's a lot of pros to doing that if you can put together a good model and take it from there. So,
David, also, if I may, I want to make another comment related to both Stefan's invitation to the, for the co-authors, but also what I was just talking about, these ongoing studies. Another related issue, and I think there is really no point in discussing it, but rather than just pointing out, is sort of the issue of, I don't want to call it free riding, but more, lack of perhaps discipline and diligence on behalf of some of our co-authors. And again, not X-Culture co-authors, but, people in general. So we often have situations where, when we invite, co-authors, lots of people sign up. And I have no doubt, Stefan, for example, that there will be 10, maybe more people who will say, I can help. And we know historically people don't always deliver. And again, it's not because of, us, it's people, it happens in any situation. But then we sort of put ourselves in this uncomfortable situation where, somebody maybe is signed up, but then maybe even sent a few sentences, or maybe corrected a few typos in the paper, but then didn't do much else. And so here we are in this sort of tricky situation. So do we still list the person as a co-author, or we don't? Or if the person says, I will do it and didn't do it, do we then go to someone else, or do we went for this person? So sort of it kind of creates this sort of ethical challenge. And so I encourage everyone to be cognizant of that, because we all live in a sort of publish and perish world. And so if you sign up and people depend on you, if you can, please help. If you can't, at the very least, maybe let the rest of the team know so that, we can then move on and maybe look for other ways to get it done. And so, initiative is good, but if you sign up, sort of try to deliver on it if you can. So that's kind of to keep that in mind. We have situations like, for example, one of the co-authors complained, very justly so, that there have been a bunch of papers where he was the data guy and he spent weeks and weeks of his time running the analysis, and then he gives the analysis to the group, says, okay, here are the results, but then the group doesn't act on it. And so all those hours of time basically didn't go anywhere. And now we cannot really go to someone else because we have the co-authors, but then, should he go and finish it? Same thing, for example, my complaint is that many times people request data. And every time when people request data, it takes me probably 3-4 hours of time just to prepare the data, have the meetings, discuss what variables are needed, get all that done. And then often many, many more hours of, questions about the variables and maybe questions about the analysis. And then again, my heart breaks when people don't really put it to good use. And I'm not necessarily talking about co-authorship here. It just, would be nice if it went somewhere. I have a folder where I have all those sort of, a separate folder for each study where people requested data. As of now, it's like 250 of them. And of those, maybe 15 at most led to a publication. And so again, it's been hundreds of cumulative hours that sort of went to nowhere. And so always, I encourage you to sort of follow through, especially if you have co-authors, and finish so that people depend on you and they're not disappointed in the end. Yeah.
I think that's a good feedback. I mean, in the future, what I hope to do is have at least one of these sessions that's related to data and data analysis, so that people can, more people can kind of take it into their own hands to do their own analysis, because it is unfair to expect 2 or 3 people worldwide to be their statisticians, to just do exploratory analysis just based on a gut feeling idea. That does, just doing an EFA analysis or correlations and other things can be very time consuming for some people. So it's a very good point. Yeah. The last topic we had was Vaz. We can talk real briefly about
just as an announcement,
the potential hackathon, the digital hackathon in the summer.
Yeah.
We're looking to do something there, and Vaz, if you want to talk about that.
Yes, so many of you have participated in our prior hackathons, and so we always get extremely positive feedback and get a lot of good outcomes. So the way we did it face-to-face was that we would normally have it right before the Academy of International Business Conference or Academy of Management Conference. And so we would have normally about 4 days when we do research, basically from dawn till dusk. So we wake up, we start with, brainstorming ideas for papers, and then, forming co-author teams. And then, every few hours you work for a few hours, and we meet, we share the progress, criticize each other, provide suggestions, go work for a few more hours, and sort of repeat. And so over like 4 days, 5 days, we would put in like 100 hours of nonstop, basically, research activity. And we always add obviously some fun stuff, like when we did it in Wisconsin, we had this nice dinner on a cruise, not cruise ship, on a river boat. In Odense, we had a lot of fun in Denmark a couple of years ago, going, traveling, doing some sightseeing, so it's a lot of nice kind of bonding experience there as well. But more importantly, it takes about 100 hours to maybe write a paper, but in normal conditions, you work for a couple of hours here, then you take a few week break, and then, a little bit more work, and then, take another break. And so it takes a year or even longer to finish a paper. And here we try to pack all those 100 hours into a few days. And if it's before a conference, even after the hackathon is over, we continue working on the project at the conference itself. Like, for example, again, when we had that conference in Vancouver, so we met before that in Wisconsin, then went to Vancouver, but kept working between the sessions on paper. So it was more like 8 days total by the time we were done. So this year, the last one was supposed to be in Singapore right before the X-Culture Symposium, and then also in Vancouver before Academy of Management. I even booked a nice, huge, like 9-bedroom house in downtown Vancouver for the hackathon. And then obviously we had to cancel it. And so it took me like half a year to get the money back because I paid like $7,500 for that house for the week. And they didn't want to refund me because they said, well, you know, you booked it too late. But then luckily, not luckily, but, you know, they realized eventually that we cannot come. So they gave me the money back eventually. But so this year we want to do the same thing, but it will be online. And we're still working on the format and the process. So, and we would like your input. It looks like the plan is to have, as before, about 10, maybe to 12 people working on maybe 3 or 4 different papers. So some people may work alone, but the idea is that most will be working probably in teams of 2, maybe 3 co-authors per paper. We want to make it concentrated in time, but because people will be from different time zones, it will be impossible to be online the whole day as it would be if we were all face-to-face. So therefore, we will likely be able to have maybe 1 meeting per day at most. And we think this time, because it's online, we may have a few breaks between the meetings. So maybe we'll have the first meeting to discuss, you know, interest and research ideas and select the most promising ones and form the co-author teams, but then take a few days break during which maybe we will prepare the data for each team, make sure that everybody has all the, you know, variables and measures. Then perhaps meet again and then present a little bit, you know, more on research design for each paper. Again, criticize, get feedback, you know, and then go and work some more, maybe for a couple more days individually or in teams, and then present maybe initial results, again, get some feedback, criticism, comments, work for a couple more days. So we are thinking it probably will be more like a week or maybe even 2 weeks. Meetings not every, you know, hour or every 3 hours, but maybe, you know, once a day or maybe even once every few days. But still the idea is that it will be like a research marathon where it will go on for a relatively short period of time during which we kind of put everything else aside. And so we work on our papers and with the goal of finishing it by the end of the hackathon. And so there will be probably 2 sort of tracks or 2 different types. So one will be, as we call it, developer. So people who would like to start a new paper from scratch. And the other one will be the finisher. So we actually pioneered that model in Odense, where we had one team that was just trying to finish an old paper. And so that worked very well. So we were able to literally submit the paper before the hackathon was over. Like we had this big ceremony where we pressed the enter button. And so we finished it during those few days and finally submitted it. And then eventually we published it in the, that one was in the European Journal of International Management, and then a follow-up paper in Harvard Business Review. So it worked very well for us and we finally were able to finish it. So this time we're also thinking there will be sort of those who want to just finish stuff, and we'll use this opportunity as like a writing retreat. So basically you just go and you write for those few days to finish something. But also there will be more for people who are starting something new and perhaps even join without any a priori idea. So they will explore what ideas are on the table, maybe some of these unfinished studies that I listed, form co-author teams, and then intensively work for it on it for a few days or maybe up to a week or 2 weeks, depending on the format. So if you have any suggestions, the main person would be Justin Kramer. So he was the one who co-organized the one at the hackathon in Odense, the hackathon in Canada, and he was the sole organizer of the one in Wisconsin. But also David Baker here, myself, and Alex Aswad are on the organizing committee. So contact any of us if you have any suggestions. And so we plan to do it sometime during the summer, but we're not sure on the dates. Again, normally we try to do it back to back with a conference so we don't have to travel twice. But this time we have a little bit more freedom, so it can be just about any time during the summer. So we'll have to figure out that later.
And I think it's important to note, you know, and several of you have participated in these hackathons. It was a very useful and engaging thing for me to do the one in Odense. But it is important to note to everybody who hasn't participated in one, that if you want to participate in one of these things, you need to be actively engaged. Yes. You need to be prepared to actively show up for every meeting, actively engage, and actively, in this case, the basic concept would be actively work very hard in between the Zoom meetings to get these papers finished, or to get this concept to a submissible form and do it quickly. The whole point is to have these things be a hyper-focus environment that, as Ravaz, I think, put it in our planning meeting, a kind of a writing retreat, if anything, for a lot of us, to make us focus when we're all distracted doing a lot of different things. We will dedicate this time to getting these papers done. And so anyone who wants to do it, needs to be prepared to do that and to actively contribute and participate throughout the time period that it's going to be held.
We'll also try to maybe invite a few journal editors, both to get their sort of maybe initial input or feedback on some of the paper ideas, but also maybe to kind of improve the chances of perhaps an acceptance later on if we send the papers to those journals. And the big also question is, how can we make it more sort of socially engaging? I'll be honest with you, the hackathons we've done, an even more important component was the social component. Like we literally lock ourselves on a campus, like, you know, like for example, in Wisconsin or in Canada. It was a university campus. We lived in dormitories. So it's almost like going back to the good old student times. We would eat at the student cafeteria. We would do some like dinners usually would be like on a budget that is way above the normal student budget. But during the day, it would be literally like just pizza, student coffee, like, you know, like very, very fun. It almost like, you know, going back to the student years. And so we know that there are many developments happening after the hackathon. Like, for example, I know that Ernesto and Bob, for example, have been working on multiple other papers that didn't come from the hackathon, but they sort of met at the hackathon or started working at the hackathon. And that's wonderful. That's what we want. So we want those kind of more friendlier relationships developing. And so the hackathon here is more like the initial booster or you know, Kickstarter, as opposed to, you know, the final step. And so with the online version, we're not sure, like there have been ideas that maybe we should all order the same food and then kind of have this kind of picnic type of, you know, style. Or we even thought about the idea, like, I don't know, we talked about that in X-Culture among the professors, but maybe we can use it here. Like, you know, everybody buys the same wine, or maybe we ship a bottle of wine to each of the participants, the same one, and we will have like wine tasting at the end of the day or something like that. So maybe, I don't know how we can make it more engaging online. But the hope is that it will still be not only about research, but also about kind of getting to know closer our colleagues here and having some fun together. So I don't know if you have any comments or suggestions at this time, or later, if you want to send them to us, we would appreciate it.
I can help with facilitation. If you would like to make a bit of fun, then I can provide such.
Yeah, any ideas are welcome, yes. Remember though that this time, these are all serious people. Like, I mean, again, I see many of them here, so those who participate. But yeah, during hackathon, somehow everybody becomes like 30 years younger and behaves as we are 18 again, which is fine, I guess. Why not? I mean, why not? So yeah, so I guess, you know, maybe more, you know, age appropriate activities, you know, that are more appropriate for younger people. I think they would be, you know, suitable here as well, as long as they are within sort of reason with. So serious people, I guess.
And we will have at least one more of these. At the moment, I think that the plan is to move forward with these on a quarterly basis. We can accelerate that to a monthly basis if we find that's necessary. Right now, at least the feedback I saw on the survey initially would be that we'll hope to put together something that's engaging like this and interesting on a quarterly basis. And then if we want, we can accelerate it, or there's been some suggestions to set up some sub-interest groups, let's say for methods, for data analysis, for developmental. And we can look at that going forward and even have the meetings like this, but then have separate breakout rooms potentially for the sub-interest groups to let people focus more on what their real interest is, because this is a big group. And we do need to kind of refine it going forward to make sure that it's engaging for everybody and most productive as we can to help things move forward. Does anybody else have any feedback before we close out? Yeah.
I'll only say that we had about a dozen papers published last year based on X-Culture data. Some of them were published by external researchers, so who are not professors in the X-Culture project. Some of them were published in the FT50 journals. We had, I think, 3 total last year. So while we complain that so many studies start and not all of them are finished, there are still quite a few that are being finished. So, and I think we never will see the 100% completion rate.
And there's quite a few under review right now.
Yeah,
Stefan is,
we have probably about a dozen under review.
Guest editor of a special issue on that. So.
Yeah. Oh, maybe Stefan needs to say a few words. Stefan, do you want to say about that special initiative with the Journal of International European Journal of International Management?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thank you. I didn't think about that. Yeah, but actually there is a call for special sections. So it's an ongoing call for papers. I don't have the link at hand at the moment, but I'm happy we can distribute it, I think, by email. But this is for European Journal of International Management. I'm a senior editor there, and the topic is very broad. It's really related to X-culture and global virtual teams. The other senior editors, I think, Vas, you are one of the guest editors, and also Alfredo and Ursula. I think they were all here. I think I saw them at some stage. I think Ursula has left already, but so the four of us, we are basically guest editing that special section. And if you have any papers in progress related to global virtual teams, it doesn't have to be with X-culture, but I think the vast majority of submissions that I've received so far is, oh yeah, here we go, is related to X-culture. And you can see here the title, New Directions for Experiential Learning, Cross-Cultural Collaboration, Remote Work, and Leadership in Global Virtual Teams. And you see here the guest editors. So yeah, it is a good journal. It's growing. I think it's not chips, of course. But the editorial board is getting better, and we have some really good people there, also from X-culture, some senior editors there. And I'm sure many of you also know the editor-in-chief of eGym, that's Ilan Allen, very well-known in IB. So if you have any papers in progress or any questions, feel free to contact me if you want, and happy to answer any questions related to that.
And if I may add to that, we also have a problem at the Cross-Cultural Strategic Management Journal with submissions. So I'm at this time acting editor-in-chief. So our editor-in-chief had some health issues a few months ago. And so they asked me to step up for now and take on that role. And so one of the problems we have with the publisher is that we are not getting enough papers accepted for publication. So we're literally not filling our issues with papers. So we are still very rigorous and we reject a lot of papers, but we would like to see more. And so, especially for the upcoming issues. So if you have any papers, again, it's not a top journal. The impact factor is something like 2.6. So it's good, but not, not jibs. But at the same time, so we kind of need good papers to fill the upcoming issue. So if you have anything that you might want to consider, so cross-cultural strategic management, again, it doesn't mean that anything that will be submitted will be accepted, but we kind of in need of good papers at this time.
Well, and I think it's fair to say that those are two excellent journals to target for X-culture and global virtual team publications. Correct me if I'm wrong, there might be one or two at most that have been published in JIBS.
We had a couple, but yes, JIBS doesn't like student samples. We actually now have a discussion with the editor about that, and we will be writing an editorial with Alain Verbeke and Günther Stahl if everything goes fine, because specifically that's sort of a somewhat misunderstood issue. Journal of World Business published several of our papers, but we had one, Ernesto can say more, but there was one rejected like a week ago, specifically saying that we don't publish student samples, which makes no sense because they do publish. And in fact, not only student samples in general, but they published a few of our own papers based on X-culture data. So it almost seems like it depends on which editor is processing or maybe if the editor is having a bad day. So, but then yes, Journal of International Management, eGym, Cross-Cultural Strategic Management, all of those are very happy to publish papers based, including on student samples. And so that would be an opportunity. And they are solid, good journals. Not FT50, but still solid, good journals.
And I think it's a good suggestion that people can target good pedagogical journals, which are not going to be A-star journals, but there are some very good ones that are B. There's the Academy of Management, Learning and Education, which is really the premier probably, but there are others. So there's lots of places to target with X-culture data and X-culture papers.
All right, so then, yeah, I guess, anything else, David? I think that's pretty much all we wanted to cover, right?
I think that's it. Everybody be on the lookout. I think we'll have another meeting next quarter. I've already received some some volunteers to, one from a journal editor, a new journal editor that volunteered to hold a discussion on pedagogical papers. So there's some interesting things that are coming up that we'll have more information on in the future. And I suspect we'll have a lot more information on the next meeting about the hackathon and the structure of it within the next couple of months.
Mhm.
Thank you for everybody for showing up. Hopefully it's been productive for you.
Yeah.
And let's do this again.
Yep, let's do it again. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you to you all.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
We should have taken a picture maybe, but I guess.
Yeah.
All right, good night, everyone.
We-
Bye-bye.
Have a nice one. Bye-bye.